Welcome back to Dark True Crime. Tonight, we're diving into a case that turned a small Tennessee town's Halloween celebration into a nightmare that lasted over a decade. This is the story of Karen Swift, a 44-year-old mother of four who went to a costume party one October night and never made it home alive. Her body would be found 6 weeks later in a cemetery, and the person responsible? Well, that's where this story gets complicated. Before we get into the chilling details, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this case has more twists than you could ever imagine. October 29, 2011. Dyersburg, Tennessee, a small town about 75 miles northeast of Memphis, was alive with Halloween spirit. At the Farms, a country club where the locals gathered, a costume party was in full swing. People were dressed up, drinks were flowing, and everyone was having a good time. Everyone except Karen Swift. Karen had come to the party as a plus one with her friends Bill and Kathy Bona. Usually, Karen was the life of the party, the person who could light up any room with her contagious energy and warm personality. But that night, something was off. People who knew her noticed she wasn't herself. She seemed distracted, maybe even a little sad. She wasn't having fun. There was a good reason for that. Just 3 weeks earlier, on October 10th, Karen had filed for divorce from her husband, David Swift. They'd been married for 22 years, had 4 beautiful children together, but the marriage had fallen apart. They were still living in the same house on Willie Johnson Road, but they slept in separate rooms. The tension was unbearable. Around midnight, Karen, Bill, and Kathy left the party and went back to the Bona's house where Karen planned to spend the night. She didn't want to go home. She didn't want to be around David. But then her 9-year-old daughter Ashley called. Ashley was at a sleepover and wanted to come home. She wasn't feeling well and needed her mom. So Karen did what any mother would do. She left the Bona's house, picked up Ashley from the sleepover, and drove home, arriving around 1:30 in the morning on October 30th. David was still awake when they got there. He'd waited up to make sure his wife and daughter got home safely. Karen and Ashley went to bed together in the same room, and David went to his separate room. That was the last time anyone saw Karen Swift alive. The next morning, David woke up and couldn't find Karen anywhere in the house. Her car was gone. Her phone went straight to voicemail. At first, he might have thought she'd gone out early for errands. But as the hours passed and she didn't come back, didn't answer calls, didn't respond to texts, something felt wrong. That afternoon, 2 hunters were driving down a rural road when they spotted something unusual. A white 2004 Nissan Murano abandoned on Harness Road about a mile from the Swift home. The car had a shredded tire, and when police arrived to investigate, they found the doors locked. Inside the vehicle was Karen's Halloween costume and some of her clothes. But no signs of violence, no blood, no Karen. David gave police a key to the car, and when an officer got inside to examine it, he noticed something strange. The driver's seat was pushed all the way forward. The officer was 6'2", and he had no problem fitting in the driver's seat without having to push it back. Karen was a smaller woman. Why would the seat be so far forward? Then police got another call. A neighbor had found 2 cell phones, both smashed and destroyed, lying in their yard about 400 to 500 feet from the Swift home. The phones belonged to Karen. And here's where it gets interesting. Karen had 2 phones. One was her regular phone that everyone knew about. The other was a secret phone, one she'd gotten specifically to communicate without David knowing. She'd told her friends she needed it because David was monitoring her, watching her every move, and she needed privacy as she planned her divorce. If you've ever been in a relationship where you felt like you had to hide things just to have a moment of peace, drop a comment below. Because what Karen was experiencing is something a lot of people go through when they're trying to leave a controlling partner. David Swift told investigators he didn't know about Karen's secret phone. But when police dug deeper, they found something that contradicted that claim. The secret phone's number was programmed into David's work phone. He knew about it. He'd been monitoring her all along. By that evening, when Karen still hadn't shown up, her friends Bill and Kathy Bona called the police to report her missing. Interestingly, David didn't call first. He called after the Bonas had already reported her disappearance. And when investigators interviewed him, they noticed he made some demeaning comments about Karen. Comments that seemed odd for a husband whose wife had just vanished. The Dyer County Sheriff's Office launched a massive search operation. Volunteers, along with personnel from the Sheriff's Department, Tennessee Highway Patrol, the Dyer County Rescue Squad, members of the Shelby County Sheriff's Department, and even a THP helicopter, combed through the countryside looking for any sign of Karen. Days turned into weeks. Every day that passed, hope dimmed a little more. Karen's father, Gary Johnson, spoke to the media, devastated that his daughter was missing. Her 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls, were heartbroken. Their mother had always been there for every game, every dance competition, every important moment. She would never just disappear on them. Then, 6 weeks after Karen vanished, on December 10, 2011, a group of hunters were walking through a remote area near Bledsoe Cemetery, just off Harness Road and Burnt Mill Road. The area was covered in kudzu vines and thick vegetation, about 3 miles from the Swift home. One of them noticed something that didn't belong. It was Karen's body, hidden beneath a tangle of vines and undergrowth. She'd been there the entire 6 weeks, concealed by nature, while her family desperately searched for her. The medical examiner would later confirm what everyone feared. Karen Swift had been murdered. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. According to the autopsy report that was later obtained by a journalist through an open records request, Karen had been struck in the front of her head, possibly with a hammer. The injuries to her frontal and temporal lobes suggested she was facing her attacker when she was killed. There were no defensive wounds on her hands or arms, which meant she never had a chance to protect herself. Someone had run up to her very quickly, catching her completely off guard, and delivered a crushing blow to her head. The autopsy also revealed something else disturbing. Karen's body was only clothed in a pair of black underwear that had been pulled down around her thighs. Everything else was gone. A private detective who later worked on the case described it as obviously an act of extreme rage. This wasn't a random attack. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was personal. Someone had been furious with Karen Swift, furious enough to kill her in a brutal, violent manner. Dyer County Sheriff Jeff Box ruled Karen's death a homicide. But who did it? And why? All eyes turned to David Swift. He was the last person to see Karen alive. They were going through a messy divorce. Friends and neighbors came forward with stories about David's controlling, jealous behavior. Stories that painted a picture of a man who couldn't let his wife go. Jennifer Guerin, a neighbor, testified that whenever Karen came over to her house, David would eventually show up, insisting that Karen come home with him. Amanda MacArthur, another friend, said that one day after running an errand with Karen, they noticed David's car in the parking lot. The behavior frightened Karen because she realized he'd been following her. He'd been stalking her. Janie Helm, another neighbor, said David had asked to access her yard so he could listen to what was going on in Bill and Kathy Bona's house when Karen was visiting. He was spying on his own wife through the neighbor's property. Karen's friends also testified about the day before she disappeared. David had told Janie Helm that he wanted to take Karen out to dinner, but she'd rejected him, choosing to go to the Halloween party instead. The rejection had upset him. He couldn't handle that Karen was moving on, that she was done with their marriage. Bill and Kathy Bona, the friends Karen had been with at the Halloween party, testified that they'd loaned Karen $2,000 to help her pay for divorce attorneys. They'd also given her that secret phone so she could communicate privately. Karen had told them she was involved in something she wasn't proud of, something complicated in her personal life. The Bonas said they didn't want to spend time around David because he made them uncomfortable. They described multiple incidents where he'd intruded on them, demanding to know where Karen was, begging them to help get her back home. And here's something that adds another layer to this story. In the period before her murder, Karen's behavior had changed. Her friends and family noticed she'd become involved with a new circle of friends who partied at the farm's golf club. She was going out more, drinking more, staying away from home more often. Some people whispered that Karen might have been involved with a swingers group called the Pink Poodle Club. There were rumors of affairs, both Karen and David allegedly seeing other people. Karen's daughter, Ashley, who was 9 years old at the time of her mother's death, later said that while her mom was always present for the important things, she'd noticed her mother was going out at night more frequently. Ashley had even tearfully pleaded with Karen to stay home more. The prosecution would later argue that David couldn't handle Karen's independence, couldn't accept that she was building a life without him. But the defense had a different story. They said David's attempts to reconcile with Karen shouldn't be seen as controlling or obsessive. They were evidence of a man who loved his wife and hoped they could work things out, just like they'd done before. Because this wasn't the first time David and Karen had divorced. They'd actually split up in the year 2000, divorced, but then remarried that same year. David's defense attorney would argue that David was hopeful they could do it again, that maybe Karen would change her mind. Make sure you're subscribed because what happened next in this investigation is absolutely shocking. The case went cold for over a decade, leaving Karen's family without answers and a community haunted by an unsolved murder. Despite all the suspicion around David, despite all the testimony about his controlling behavior, investigators couldn't find physical evidence linking him to the crime. There was no DNA, no fingerprints, no murder weapon, no blood in the house or garage, no blood in either of their cars. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation sent forensic specialists to process the Swift home, looking for any trace evidence that could prove a crime had been committed there. They found nothing. The case file was sealed, including Karen's autopsy, and for years the investigation stalled. David Swift was named a person of interest, but he was never charged. He maintained his innocence, saying he had nothing to do with Karen's death, and as time went on, he moved on with his life. In 2014, 3 years after Karen's murder, David met a woman named Kelly Essman on the Christian dating site Christian Mingle. They hit it off, fell in love, and married in May 2016. David had remarried and was living in Alabama, trying to build a new life. But Karen's family couldn't move on. Her children grew up without their mother. Her parents grew old without their daughter. And every Halloween, the community of Dyersburg was reminded of the woman who went to a costume party and never came home. Then, in 2018, something changed. A private investigator named Helen Michelle Cohen began looking into Karen's case with fresh eyes. She started interviewing people who hadn't been thoroughly questioned before. She dug into the rumors about Karen's personal life, the alleged affairs, the supposed involvement with other couples. And she uncovered some disturbing information. Employees at the farms where the Halloween party had been held confirmed that Karen had been involved in an altercation with more than one woman that night. One of those women was the daughter of a prominent man in the community, someone suspected to be the owner of the country club. After Karen vanished, 3 separate witnesses reported seeing this prominent man with a metal detector in the area where Karen's body was later found. Was he looking for something? Did he know something? These new revelations suggested that maybe David wasn't the only person who had motive to hurt Karen. Maybe there were other people involved, other secrets, other reasons someone wanted Karen dead. But despite these new leads, David Swift remained the prime suspect. And in 2019, 8 years after Karen's murder, the Dyer County Sheriff's Office finally turned over its evidence file to the District Attorney's Office. District Attorney Danny Goodman said the file was massive. It started from Karen's birth and went all the way through her death and beyond. Volumes and volumes of information. And as prosecutors reviewed everything, they became convinced they had enough to bring charges. On August 8th, 2022, more than a decade after Karen Swift was murdered, police arrested David Swift and charged him with first-degree premeditated murder. He was living in Alabama at the time, remarried, and the arrest came as a complete shock to many people, including his daughter Ashley, who was 20 years old by then. Ashley told reporters she couldn't understand why, after all these years of silence, they were suddenly arresting her father. "Why right now?" she asked. "Why after all these years is this happening?" David pleaded not guilty to the charges. His defense team immediately started building their case, arguing that the evidence against him was purely circumstantial and that David had been wrongly accused. The trial began on May 28, 2024, 13 years after Karen's murder. The entire community of Dyersburg watched as the case finally went to court. What evidence would the prosecution present? Would it be enough to convict David Swift of killing his wife? On the very first day of trial, prosecutor Danny Goodman stood before the jury and made something very clear. This is not a DNA case. This is not a fingerprint case. This is not a ballistic testing case. There would be no physical evidence directly linking David Swift to Karen's murder. Instead, Goodman said this case was about motive, opportunity, and behavior. It was about a controlling husband who couldn't accept that his wife was leaving him for good. It was about a man who had the means and the opportunity to kill Karen and stage it to look like an abduction. The prosecution's theory was chilling. They believed that on the morning of October 30th, after Karen and Ashley had gone to sleep together, David moved Ashley to another room without waking her. Then he dragged Karen from the bedroom to the garage and violently attacked her, stomping on her head with such force that her skull fractured. He loaded her body into a car, drove to Bledsoe Cemetery, dumped her body beneath the kudzu vines, and then staged the crime scene to make it look like she'd been abducted after leaving the house. The prosecution presented phone records showing that Karen's secret phone had been used hours after she'd gone to bed to call the device's voicemail. Who made that call? They believed it was David, trying to cover his tracks, trying to make it seem like Karen had left the house on her own. They also pointed to inconsistencies in David's story. He said he didn't know about the secret phone, but it was programmed in his work phone. He made demeaning comments about Karen to investigators right after she disappeared, comments that seemed more angry than worried. But the defense fought back hard. David's attorney, Daniel Taylor, told the jury that David Swift did not kill his wife, and he had evidence to prove it. What was that evidence? How did the defense argue David couldn't have committed this murder? And what did the jury ultimately decide after hearing both sides of this complicated, controversial case? Defense attorney Daniel Taylor stood before the jury and presented what he believed was the single strongest piece of evidence proving David Swift's innocence: David's knee injury. At the time of Karen's murder, David had re-injured his knee and was on crutches. His physical therapist testified at trial that David would have had extreme difficulty walking and lifting anything substantial. The prosecution's theory required David to move a sleeping 9-year-old child from one room to another, drag a 125-pound woman from the bedroom to the garage, violently stomp on her head multiple times, load her body into a car, drive 3 miles to a cemetery, carry her body from the road into the woods, and conceal her beneath vegetation, all while on crutches with a severely injured knee. Taylor argued it was physically impossible. How could a man who could barely walk commit such a brutal, physically demanding murder? But the prosecution had an answer for that too. They accused David of faking the severity of his re-injury. They presented testimony from a neighbor who said that on October 29th, the day before Karen disappeared, he'd seen David moving hay bales without crutches. Each bale weighed about 65 pounds, and David was lifting and carrying them with no apparent difficulty. So which was it? Was David truly injured and incapable of committing this crime? Or was he faking to create an alibi? The jury would have to decide. But there was another crucial piece of evidence the defense presented, and it came from the most unexpected source: Ashley Swift, David and Karen's daughter. Ashley testified at her father's trial, and what she said contradicted a key part of the prosecution's theory. The prosecutors claimed that David had moved Ashley from Karen's bed to another room that night so he could attack Karen without waking the child. But Ashley said that wasn't what happened. She testified that it was her mother, not her father, who moved her that night. "I will go to my grave knowing that it was my mother," Ashley told the court, and later repeated to Dateline reporters. Ashley's testimony was powerful because she had no reason to lie. She was only 9 years old when her mother was murdered, but she remembered that night clearly. And if Karen had moved Ashley herself, then the prosecution's timeline didn't make sense. Why would Karen move her daughter to another room and then go back to sleep, only to be attacked by David? The defense also challenged another crucial element of the prosecution's case: the phone call made from inside the Swift home. Prosecutors said that someone used Karen's secret phone hours after she'd gone to bed to call the phone's voicemail. They believed this proved David had the phone and was trying to cover his tracks. But Taylor argued the evidence about that phone call was unreliable. Phone records from 2011 weren't as precise as they are today. The location data showing the phone was inside the house could have been wrong, and even if the call was made, there was no proof David made it. As the trial progressed, more friends and acquaintances of Karen testified. Some painted David as a controlling, obsessive husband who stalked his wife and couldn't accept their marriage was over. Others testified about Karen's changing behavior in the months before her death, her new circle of friends, her increased drinking and partying, suggesting her life had become complicated in ways that might have put her in danger from someone other than David. The courtroom was packed day after day. Dyersburg was a small town, and everyone knew about this case. Everyone had an opinion. Some people were convinced David was guilty, that he'd killed Karen in a fit of rage when she refused to reconcile. Others believed David was being railroaded, that the real killer was still out there. After 4 days of testimony and evidence, the case went to the jury on June 6, 2024. The jury had to consider multiple charges: first-degree premeditated murder, second-degree murder, and the lesser-included offense of voluntary manslaughter. Hours passed, then a day. The jury was deliberating, trying to sort through all the circumstantial evidence, all the conflicting testimony, all the theories about what really happened to Karen Swift. Finally, they came back with a verdict: not guilty. David Swift was found not guilty of first-degree premeditated murder, not guilty of second-degree murder. The jury had decided the prosecution hadn't proven beyond a reasonable doubt that David had planned and carried out his wife's murder. The courtroom erupted. Some people were shocked. Others were vindicated. Karen's family sat there, trying to process what this meant. After 13 years of waiting for justice, after finally getting David to trial, the jury said he didn't do it. But the story wasn't over yet, because while the jury had acquitted David of the murder charges, they were deadlocked on the charge of voluntary manslaughter. They couldn't reach a unanimous verdict. Some jurors believed David might have killed Karen in a heat of passion without premeditation, but others weren't convinced even of that. The judge declared a mistrial on the voluntary manslaughter charge. And 2 weeks later, David Swift was indicted again, this time specifically for voluntary manslaughter. His attorneys immediately filed motions to have the case dismissed. They argued that retrying David on the lesser charge after he'd been acquitted of murder was double jeopardy, a violation of his constitutional rights. But in October 2024, the Tennessee Court of Appeals denied their motion. The court ruled that because the jury had been hung on the manslaughter charge, it wasn't double jeopardy to retry him. A new trial date was set for May 7th, 2025. David Swift remains in custody, awaiting his second trial. And the question everyone is asking is, will this trial finally bring closure to Karen Swift's family? Or will it end the same way, with a hung jury and no definitive answer about who killed Karen? And here's where this case gets even more complicated. Because while David was fighting these charges in Tennessee, something else was happening in Alabama. Remember Kelly Essman, the woman David married in 2016 after meeting her on Christian Mingle? Their marriage didn't last. Kelly and David separated and eventually divorced. And in July 2023, David Swift was arrested in Jefferson County, Alabama, and charged with felony stalking of his ex-wife. Kelly Essman finally came forward publicly, giving exclusive interviews to 2020 and Dateline. And what she described sent chills down everyone's spine, because it sounded exactly like what Karen's friends had testified about David's behavior toward Karen. Kelly said that after they separated, David began stalking her. She installed security cameras at her home, and the footage captured David in her backyard in the middle of the night lurking around her property. She'd thought David was sincere when she met him, that he was a grieving widower who'd lost his wife under tragic circumstances. She'd believed everything he told her. But once their relationship ended, she saw another side of him. "I look at how easily I talked to him and believed everything that he told me," Kelly said in her interview. and the sense that I got that he was sincere. Why didn't I see it? How do I trust that I can see through anything else? The jury in David's murder trial never heard about the stalking charges against Kelly Essman. The judge ruled that information was too prejudicial, that it might bias the jury against David. But now that Kelly has come forward, people are looking at David's behavior with fresh eyes. If you've ever had a friend or family member in a relationship with someone who seemed normal at first, but gradually revealed controlling, obsessive behavior, I want you to comment below. Because cases like this remind us that red flags don't always show up immediately. Sometimes they appear slowly, over time, and by the time you realize what's happening, you're already in danger. So where does this leave us? 13 years after Karen Swift was murdered, we still don't have definitive answers. David Swift was acquitted of murder, but may still be convicted of manslaughter. There are alternate theories about other people who might have had motive to hurt Karen. And the truth about what happened that Halloween night remains elusive. What we do know is this: Karen Swift was a 44-year-old mother of 4 who was trying to rebuild her life. She'd filed for divorce. She was making plans for her future. And on October 30th, 2011, someone took all of that away from her in the most violent way possible. Her children had to grow up without their mother. Ashley, who was just 9 years old when Karen died, has lived more than half her life without her mom. She told reporters that everywhere she goes, every school, every workplace, people bring up her mother's case. It follows her constantly. The ordeal has defined her entire young adult life. Ashley is in an impossible position. She wants justice for her mother, but she also wants her father home. She testified on his behalf at trial, genuinely believing he's innocent. Ultimately, I know my family's truth, she told 2020. But what is that truth? And will Ashley ever really know what happened to her mother? Karen's parents, Gary and Carol Johnson, lost their daughter in the most horrific way. Carol told reporters after Karen's body was found, "Okay, we found my daughter. Now I want to know who did this to my baby." 13 years later, they still don't have that answer. They still don't have closure. The community of Dyersburg remains divided. Some people absolutely believe David is guilty, that he killed Karen and has been getting away with it for over a decade. They point to his controlling behavior, the timing of Karen's death just weeks after filing for divorce, his inconsistent statements to police, and now the stalking charges involving his second wife. Others believe David is innocent, that he's been wrongly accused and persecuted by a system desperate to solve a cold case. They point to the lack of physical evidence, his knee injury, his daughter's testimony, and the acquittal on the murder charges. And then there are those who wonder if someone else entirely killed Karen. The rumors about her personal life, the alleged altercation at the Halloween party, the sightings of a prominent man with a metal detector near where her body was found. Could there be another suspect that investigators never fully pursued because they were so focused on David? Private investigator Helen Michelle Cohen, who dug into Karen's case in 2018, said the evidence suggests this was a personal crime, not a random crime. Someone knew Karen. Someone was enraged with her. Someone felt justified in taking her life. The autopsy revealed that Karen never saw it coming. There were no defensive wounds. She didn't have time to put her hands up to protect herself. Someone she knew, someone she might have even trusted, came at her with such speed and fury that she couldn't react. That's what makes this case so haunting. Whether it was David or someone else, Karen was killed by someone in her life. Someone who knew her routine, knew where she'd be, knew how to get close enough to her to deliver that fatal blow. As David Swift awaits his retrial on voluntary manslaughter charges, as Kelly Essman pursues stalking charges against him in Alabama, as Ashley Swift navigates life as the daughter of both a murder victim and an accused killer, the question remains, will there ever be true justice for Karen Swift? The May 2025 trial could finally provide answers. A jury will once again have to decide. Did David Swift kill his wife in a heat of passion, even if they don't believe he premeditated her murder? Or is he completely innocent of any involvement in Karen's death? One of the jurors from the first trial spoke to Dateline about the deliberation process, describing intense tension in the deliberation room. Some jurors were absolutely convinced of David's guilt. Others had reasonable doubt. The divide was so strong that they couldn't reach consensus even on the lesser charge of manslaughter. That's the reality of circumstantial cases. Without physical evidence, without eyewitnesses, without a confession, juries are left to piece together theories based on behavior, motive, and opportunity. And reasonable people can look at the same evidence and come to completely different conclusions. What's undeniable is that Halloween 2011 changed Dyersburg forever. The town that had always felt safe, where people knew their neighbors and looked out for each other, suddenly had to confront the possibility that one of their own had committed murder. The shadow of Karen's death has hung over every Halloween since. Her friends and family have kept her memory alive. They've created memorials. They've spoken to the media. They've pushed for answers and accountability. Because Karen Swift was more than just a victim in a true crime case. She was a daughter, a mother, a friend. She had dreams and plans and people who loved her. And she deserves justice, whatever that looks like. If you want to follow how David Swift's retrial unfolds, make sure you're subscribed to Dark True Crime and hit that notification bell. We'll be covering the May 2025 trial and bringing you updates as this case continues to develop. This case reminds us that true crime isn't entertainment. These are real people, real families, real lives destroyed by violence. Karen's children will never get their mother back. Her parents will never get their daughter back. And no matter what verdict any jury reaches, that fundamental truth remains unchanged. Next time on Dark True Crime, we'll be covering another case that will keep you up at night, another story that proves sometimes the most dangerous person in your life is someone you trust completely. You won't want to miss it. Until then, stay safe, trust your instincts, and remember that if you or someone you know is in a controlling or abusive relationship, there are resources available. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24 hours a day at 1-800-799-7233. Don't wait until it's too late. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.